Amala here at PragerU, and today I wanted to come on live just for a short little segment to bring you a story that I've been seeing in the news recently, and I've been seeing a lot of false reporting around this story, or at the very least, a lack of journalistic integrity. Now, we sort of went down this lane when I spoke about Ma'Khia Bryant. For those of you who are unfamiliar with her, she was a 16-year-old out of Columbus, Ohio, who was shot and killed by the police whilst committing attempted murder. And a lot of the reporting around Ma'Khia Bryant and her death was completely false. They were spinning a narrative for Black Lives Matter that she was somehow a victim of the systemic racism of American police. And that was simply not the case for anybody who saw the body cam footage of the incident or was at any case aware of what happened to Ma'Khia Bryant. To anybody who saw that story, watched the video, or took any time to read into what that girl was doing, knows that that police officer was completely justified. Now, what these two stories have in common, the one I'm about to share with you today, is a complete lack of journalistic integrity and a way in which journalists report on these issues and leave little lies in their reporting by omission. They omit very key points when they're reporting on these issues, and they expect the general public not to be aware of these things. Now, what I'm going to show you first is an article that is truthful, that tells the real truth behind this situation. And let's go ahead and pull that up. So for those of you who don't know, this past Monday, an NYPD officer by the name of Anastasios Tsakos was killed by a young woman who ran him over in the street and left him there to die. So we're already gonna tread lightly with this subject matter because it is a very tough thing to experience. I'm sure his family is grieving. From what I've read, he's a father of two, and those two children are now fatherless due to the actions of this young woman. Now, you can see her picture right here in this article. Now, let's talk about this young woman. Her name is Jessica Bouvier. Now, Jessica Bouvier has a podcast called Face the Reality. And this podcast is particularly critical of police. And if you're reading the headline on this article right now, you'll read, New York radio host tells audience, F the police, then allegedly rams NYPD officer, killing him before speeding away. Now, when we go through this article, you'll get a little bit of insight as to who Jessica is as a person. She's filming this podcast 2 hours before this incident occurs, in which she states, F the police. So we already know how Jessica feels about police officers, and during this podcast, she is drinking heavily and doing other drugs from what the police reports have stated recently. So she's talking about the Derek Chauvin trial in this podcast that she's streaming on YouTube. She's saying F the police, and she's playing F the police by NWA. So we already know the tone going into this story. So Jessica is doing all this, spewing all this hateful rhetoric towards police officers and drinking all the meanwhile. And what she chooses to do after this podcast is the incident that we're talking about right now. So Jessica finishes this podcast where she's saying F the police, she's disparaging the profession, she's talking down about police officers, and then she gets in her car. And she goes and she drives around, and what do you know? Anastasios Tsakos has come to the scene of a car crash, is just trying to direct traffic in the street. And Jessica, at full speed, going over the speed limit, runs him over and kills him. And I believe in the reporting on this, it says that Tsakos, the officer, flew 100 feet. That is how hard Jessica Bouvier hit him with her car. Now, we know why she did it. I just told you why she did it. In her podcast, she says very clearly, F the police. And for those of you who are unaware of that, or maybe don't believe that, let me show you a quick little clip here. Let's hear her say it for ourselves, okay?
Now look at this. It's the same woman just hours earlier as she live streams a podcast in which she appears to be drinking shots and washes it down with Snapple. She ends the podcast this way.
The police.
Where are you coming from?
Okay, so you all heard her say it. You all heard her say F the police. And then when she goes and runs over this police officer, killing a father of two, suddenly she takes a different tone. She's crying. I was just coming from my studio. All I was doing was filming a podcast and driving back home. Yeah, sure. But anybody who just watched what I just saw knows exactly how she feels about police officers. And what is this the result of? And I did a video on this earlier today. This is the result of we as a country allowing the BLM rhetoric, the false narrative surrounding police to live on in our general platforms, in the public, for that narrative to be pushed by mainstream media, by big tech. People are hearing this, and people in our country assume that police officers are racist, that they're somehow part of some systemic oppression or some systemic racism against black people in this nation, and it's simply not the case. And anybody who takes the time to look into policing in America, look at how difficult the job is, how dangerous the job is, knows that police officers are only going out to do their job, to protect their communities, and to come home to their families. That's all it is. And this woman here, Jessica Bouvet, has fallen victim to the false narrative by BLM, by mainstream media, by big tech, that police are somehow racist. And she turned herself into a monster, and she went and took the life of a police officer, a father of two, who was simply doing his job in hopes of coming home to his family and protecting them and taking care of them and providing for them. Now, let's go into some of the reporting behind this issue. I'm going to pull up a few articles for you here. Now, the first one is from ABC New York. Headline reads, NYPD officer struck and killed on Long Island Expressway in Queens. Okay, fair enough. That's the truth. Let's read through it. So they talk about this officer, a father of two, who was killed. They talk about who he was killed by. They state that she was recklessly driving, that she was under the influence, but nowhere in this article do they talk about how Bouvet said F the police in her stream 2 hours prior to going and killing this police officer. So does that sound like journalistic integrity to you? Does that sound like truthful journalism? Does that sound like truthful reporting? Because it doesn't to me. And ABC is a significant network that should be held accountable, should be responsible for telling the truth. And they haven't done so in this article. Let's move on. CNN. Here's another article. On-duty NYPD officer dies after being struck by an intoxicated hit-and-run driver with a suspended license on the Long Island Expressway. So let's go through this article here. Talks about the officer, Officer Tsakos, says that he was killed whilst coming to a scene of an additional car crash at the time. Goes through the person who killed him, says that she was intoxicated, makes no mention of the fact that she just held an anti-police podcast 2 hours prior to going and killing this man. Next, Wall Street Journal. NYPD officer fatally struck while responding to an earlier crash. Okay, and I'm not going to go through every single paragraph of this article. I'm just going to tell you that this trend is the same. This pattern is the same. All these news outlets come and talk about this issue, talk about the fact that this young girl was intoxicated and went and struck a police officer and fatally injured him, but none of them make any mention of the fact that she was a Black Lives Matter supporter who was previously saying F the cops before going out and killing this man. So the media has no intention of being truthful to the public, no intention of letting their audience know what the true intent was behind this situation. And this is what's going to happen. They're going to push the BLM narrative. They're going to keep pushing the story that policing in America is racist, that we have a systemic problem in this country, but they're going to ignore the stories like this, the stories where the BLM narrative actually poses a real threat to society, to human life, and to police officers. And to the police officers out there who are watching, this is what we're going to experience. This is what we're going to see. The pushing of the BLM narrative and the suppression of what's really happening down in the front lines as a police officer. This is a very dangerous occupation to have on its face, without all this hateful rhetoric that's happening towards police officers right now. And now the occupation is even harder to hold, because look at how the public responds to you. Look at how the media portrays you. Look at how big tech and social media choose to portray these situations. They're not honest at all. And I don't blame police officers who quit their job, who don't want to do the work anymore. And we're going to see a decline in this type of work. We are already seeing it. especially in the cities that are calling to defund the police, who are allowing these BLM riots and protests to continue on their streets. We are going to see the occupation of being a police officer wither away, and I do not blame them because it is now a thankless occupation. And on top of that, it's a dangerous one. Why would you want to go out into the street and protect citizens who do not like you and who do not appreciate that the work that you are doing for them? I can't imagine anybody wanting to do that. I wouldn't want to do that, and I love this country. So to the police officers out there who are continuing to do their job every single day without fail, continuing to go out and protect these communities and try to provide for their families and their loved ones, I want to say thank you to you, because no matter what happens, there are people out there who support you. There are people like me, other conservatives, who support you and back the blue, and we will continue to do so. But I want you guys to really think about how we portray being a police officer in this country, because right now it's pretty disgusting. And I want to make that very, very clear. It's disgusting the way that we portray police officers in this country, men and women who are just going out to do their jobs, protect society. And I wanted to bring a large highlight to this story right now because not a lot of people are talking about the true motives behind what this young girl did. And I'm going to emphasize it again. 2 hours before she went and killed this police officer, she went on a tirade on the internet, on her own podcast, saying, F the police. So, again, to all the police officers watching, anybody who's out there serving our country, I want to thank you for doing what you do. And I just wanted to highlight this story today so that you can get a look at what's really happening out here for police officers and how the media chooses to support a narrative that is not serving us whatsoever. So